Once again, everyone, it's a fresh edition of Weather for Weather Geeks here on this Tuesday evening. What a day we had today. You know, it rained some today, but I didn't wear a jacket on my way into work. I just left to get some dinner and did not wear a jacket this evening, and it's the dead of winter. I love it, actually. I'm not a huge fan of the snow and cold myself, especially after the holidays. If it doesn't snow a lick after Christmas, that would be just fine with me, but I live in the wrong place for that. So anyway, I'm happy with this pattern. I know a lot of people are not necessarily all that happy. And we actually did set a record high today. We reached 59 at the airport this afternoon, breaking the old record by a degree. That old record was 58, set in 1959. So a record-setting day across the valley today. All right, I get a lot of questions as we go into these warm winter stretches. We had it last year. We're having it this January. What happened to the winters we used to have? It used to be so snowy, and, you know, is this climate change and those sorts of questions. All good questions. But some digging into the data does reveal that the general perception that it used to be a lot snowier in the 80s and 70s is, well, it's simply not true. Check out the numbers here. Now, what I did was I looked at the numbers for Youngstown, Akron, and Pittsburgh, so I didn't want it to just be skewed by the numbers at the Youngstown Warren Airport. So I looked at 3 regional sites, and the result, very similar for all 3 places, Pittsburgh, Youngstown, Akron, in that this decade has been the snowiest when you look back through the last 5 decades. Snowier than the 70s, snowier than last decade. Now, of course, this decade is not through, and if we have a few mild winters with a relative lack of snow, this can change. But as it stands right now, this has been the snowiest decade when you look back through the 1970s. The least snowy decades were the 80s and the 90s. But since the turn of the century, it's actually been snowier than it was back in the 70s. A lot of people remember the 70s for those really harsh, awful winters, and sure, there were a couple of those in the late 70s, but the rest of the decade was not like that. In fact, the early 70s overall were fairly calm weather-wise in the winter. We didn't have tremendous amounts of snow, and those were not record-setting cold winters in the early and even mid-70s. All right, so, well, let's shift gears and talk about the rain that we've had over the last 24 hours. We had one little burst that came through late afternoon that dropped some local downpours, and so in Boardman at my house, I ended up with about a half an inch. We ended up with about a half an inch at the airport and over towards Hermitage as well, while downtown Youngstown, Austintown, Canfield were closer to a quarter of an inch. Didn't rain quite as heavily there this afternoon, about a half an inch in Newton Falls, so your mileage varied a little bit across the region today, depending on what happened late in the afternoon. Well, as I record this evening it is 7:20. The radar's pretty quiet here locally. I'll pop my camera off, and you can see that it might be a sprinkle or something up towards the lakeshore. That's about it. I'm going to keep an eye on this area that's up towards eastern parts of Wisconsin into western Michigan. This is what's going to pivot our way late tonight and into tomorrow morning. And notice we do have a little blue starting to show up here west of Milwaukee. And I wouldn't be totally shocked if we saw a wet snowflake or two in our region tomorrow morning. Let's take a look at our high-res futurecast here, and you'll see what I'm talking about. As we go into the night tonight, there could be just a touch of rain out there, a little mist maybe, but I think the more substantial light rain, a more concentrated area, comes in prior to daybreak tomorrow. I think tomorrow is going to get off to a pretty damp start. This will be light rain, even just drizzle in some spots. Again, wet snowflake or two a possibility, and the wettest part of tomorrow, the most consistent rain, is probably the morning hours. As we get into the midday and the afternoon, you're going to see a lot of clouds here on our model, but nothing falling out of those. Now, I do think this is a little deceiving. I do think that there can be some drizzle or some mist that still tries to linger into parts of tomorrow afternoon. And notice our temperatures tomorrow. Now, this is still not bad for January, but it is quite a bit cooler than today. Temperature is basically flatline all day tomorrow. We'll drop into the upper 30s tonight. We'll stay in the upper 30s pretty much all day for your Wednesday. As we go into tomorrow night and into Thursday morning, there might be some fog that tries to form here by daybreak on Thursday. Whether there's fog or not, it should start out cloudy, kind of a dirty high-pressure system. It's not going to be clear right under that high Thursday morning. But as we get into the afternoon, notice the clouds part. We should get into some sun before the afternoon is through on Thursday. Here's our next rainmaker. This warm front heads our way on Friday, low pressure attached to it, and while I don't think it necessarily is raining at the very start of the day Friday, probably by mid to late morning, we'll get a period of rain that may linger into parts of the afternoon as well. So that's our next substantial area of rain at the end of the week, coming up on Friday. Well, as we transition into the weekend, I want to talk a little bit about the rain chances and also the temperatures this weekend. Here's a look at the GFS model let's skip ahead to Saturday here. I think Saturday is going to be a pretty good day. The models have backed off the rain chances here. Notice there's hardly anything around. I think that there can be some sunny breaks on Saturday, and we'll be flirting with a record again. The record high on Saturday is 59, just like today's new record of 59. Saturday's existing record is 59, and I've got a forecast high of 58. So we're going to be within shouting distance of the record, and again, probably a dry day as well. So we get into the day on Sunday. I think things go downhill once we get into the afternoon. Here's the GFS midday on Sunday. Still probably dry, but towards the end of the afternoon, the newest run keeps the rain until Sunday night. Not sure if that's the right idea. The previous run brings it in Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. I suspect that's the right idea. And so we'll get wet Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, and maybe some lingering showers with this system into early next week. Well, we've been waiting for the pattern change, and it's still on schedule for the end of next week. Here's a look at the temperature anomalies in the lower levels of the atmosphere towards the end of next week. Next Friday, the 27th, here comes the cold blob coming out of the Rockies into the Plain States, and whoops, didn't want to click on that. That cold blob will finally come east next weekend. So it's going to feel like winter. What a concept. By Saturday the 28th and into Sunday the 29th as well. A lot of cold anomalies around the eastern U.S. So it's kind of back to your regularly scheduled programming as we wrap up January and head into the month of February. Speaking of the February forecast, I've been talking this week about how February is likely to be a return to a fairly similar pattern we had in December. December ended up being a little bit colder than average and snowier than average, and I've been saying that February is likely to end up kind of like that as well. It's interesting. That's based on a lot of the modeling, which has a pretty cold look. But one of the things we do when we are making a forecast in the longer range is we look back at the past. That's how we make those seasonal forecasts, and we've had some success with that over the last few years. When we look back at past Februaries that followed very warm Januaries, and this will probably be a top 10 warm January when all is said and done. When you look at what happened the next month in February and all those years, you end up with a map that looks like this. Now, this is a combination of 10 years, the years that we had the warmest Januaries, what happened in February. Most of them were warm again. Now, we had a couple of exceptions. 1989 ended up being a cold February after a warm January. We had an average February in 2006 after a warm January. 1950 was slightly colder than average in February after a warm January, but every other year it was warm in February compared to average after that warm January. So the analogs go against the modeling a little bit. So that's making the forecast a little bit challenging for February. We'll, of course, be fine-tuning it as we get closer to the month. It's still 2 weeks until the start of the month. So stay tuned for updates on the February outlook. All right, I've rambled long enough tonight. Thanks for watching tonight's Weather for Weather Geeks. I'll see you tonight for a fresh look at the 7-day forecast on 21 News at 11 o'clock.